For years, getting caught with a banned item at airport security meant a quick trip to the confiscation bin and maybe an annoyed sigh from the agent working the line. That's no longer the full picture in 2026. The Transportation Security Administration has sharpened its enforcement posture significantly, and the penalty structure now reflects that shift directly. According to TSA's own civil enforcement guidance, the agency may impose civil penalties of up to $17,062 per violation per person, with repeat violations resulting in even higher penalties on top of that. Carrying prohibited items may cause delays for you and other travelers, but they may also lead to fines and sometimes even arrest. And that sometimes is doing a lot more work in 2026 than it used to. Stick around, because several items on this list feel completely ordinary until the moment they land you in a back room explaining yourself to federal officers. This first item sounds like a hardware store purchase, not a security violation. Number 10 on this list is oversized hand tools, specifically screwdrivers, wrenches, and pliers exceeding a strict size limit most travelers have never heard of. What most people don't realize is that these common tools are only permitted in carry-on luggage if they measure 7 inches or less in length when measured from end to end, a rule that catches plenty of DIY enthusiasts and tradespeople completely off guard when they're simply trying to get to a job site with their own gear. Anything longer than that threshold gets treated the same way a weapon would at the checkpoint, regardless of how mundane the actual tool is. Here's the twist. This isn't a rule most people ever bother checking before they pack, because a wrench feels about as far from a prohibited item as you can imagine. But TSA officers measure these tools without hesitation, and a slightly oversized pair of pliers tossed in for a home project can trigger a secondary screening that eats up 20 minutes you didn't budget for, even though nobody's accusing you of anything malicious. If a simple tool set can cause this much friction, wait until you see number 9, where an entirely innocent souvenir purchase turns into the exact same problem. This next item is something tourists buy by the dozen without a second thought. Number 9 is large snow globes and similarly liquid-filled decorative items, a category that trips up far more travelers than you'd expect. What most people don't realize is that because these souvenirs contain a significant amount of liquid, they exceed the standard 3.4-ounce limit for carry-ons and must go into checked luggage instead. No exceptions made, regardless of how sealed or decorative the item looks sitting on a gift shop shelf. TSA doesn't have a way to verify the exact liquid volume inside a snow globe without damaging it, so the entire category simply gets treated as a liquids violation by default. This is where it gets frustrating for travelers specifically, because plenty of people don't realize their bag needs checking until they're already standing at the checkpoint with a carry-on-only ticket, forcing an awkward scramble to either abandon the souvenir or find a last-minute checked bag solution. Toy weapons fall into this same innocent until it isn't category too, since foam swords or squirt guns are restricted from carry-ons because they resemble prohibited items closely enough that screeners can't take the risk of assuming they're harmless. And this is where it gets crazy, because number 8 involves something sitting in nearly every traveler's beauty bag right now, and most people have no idea it's been reclassified. This beauty tool you've packed 100 times might not make it through anymore. Number 8 is cordless hairstyling tools, specifically curling irons and flat irons that use gas or butane cartridges or that run on non-removable lithium batteries. What most people don't realize is that these tools are strictly prohibited in checked luggage entirely due to fire risk, and while you can take them in your carry-on instead, they must have a secure safety cover to prevent accidental activation during transit. The TSA's recent restrictions on certain beauty tools and products stem specifically from updated safety assessments around lithium batteries and pressurized containers, a shift that's caught even experienced travelers second-guessing routines they've followed for years without issue. This isn't a minor technicality either. A cordless styling tool with a built-in, non-removable battery packed into checked luggage without anyone realizing the rule changed can result in the entire bag getting pulled and searched, sometimes after your flight has already departed without it. Corded styling tools remain the safer bet for checked bags specifically, since they sidestep the battery issue entirely and avoid this whole category of confiscation risk. But it doesn't end here, because number 7 involves something that sounds like basic self-defense and turns out to carry real legal weight. This item has actually led to arrests, not just confiscation, at checkpoints this year. Number 7 is brass knuckles, switchblades, and automatic knives, items that cross a firm legal line rather than a simple packing mistake. What most people don't realize is that these specific items aren't just taken away and tossed in a bin the way a bottle of shampoo would be. Depending on the jurisdiction and the specific item involved, possessing certain banned weapons at a security checkpoint can trigger local law enforcement involvement rather than a purely administrative TSA response, since these items often violate state or local weapons laws independent of any federal aviation rule entirely. This is exactly why item number 4 on our countdown, which we'll get to shortly, connects directly back to this same theme of items that escalate beyond a simple fine. The pattern worth remembering here is straightforward. Liquids, tools, and styling devices tend to result in confiscation and maybe a delay. Weapons-adjacent items tend to invite a much more serious conversation with people who carry badges rather than TSA polos. Get ready, because number 6 shifts the conversation entirely away from physical objects and towards something almost nobody thinks to check: the actual alcohol percentage sitting inside their duty-free bag. This duty-free purchase has a hidden percentage limit nobody explains clearly. Number 6 is high-proof alcohol exceeding federal limits for air travel. What most people don't realize is that alcoholic beverages with an alcohol content between 24% and 70% are restricted to 5 liters, or roughly 1.3 gallons per passenger, and must be packed in unopened retail packaging to even qualify for that allowance. Beverages under 24% alcohol content face no such restriction, but anything crossing above that 70% threshold is banned outright. No exceptions, no quantity that makes it acceptable. This becomes a real problem, specifically for travelers bringing home high-proof spirits from international trips, since plenty of specialty liquors purchased abroad sit well above that 70% cutoff without an obvious label warning shoppers before they buy. Discovering this rule for the first time standing at a checkpoint, holding a bottle you just paid a premium for, is exactly the kind of expensive surprise this entire list is built to help you avoid. Now here's where the list gets genuinely serious, because number 5, 4, and 3 all involve categories where TSA's own language shifts from confiscation to explicitly warning about arrest. This next item's classification just quietly expanded to include something you might already own. Number 5 is firearm components, specifically frames, receivers, and 3D printed guns. What most people don't realize is that, consistent with the new ATF definition of firearm, TSA now considers frames, receivers, and 3D printed guns to be firearms under its civil enforcement program, meaning these items remain prohibited and must be transported strictly in accordance with TSA regulations inside a passenger's checked bag, not the cabin. That's a meaningful expansion from what many travelers assume firearm means, since a bare frame or a printed component might not look like a functional weapon at a glance, but it's treated with the exact same seriousness under current rules. TSA does allow passengers to transport unloaded firearms in checked baggage, but only if they're secured in a locked, hard-sided container and formally declared to the airline before traveling. TSA considers a firearm loaded specifically when both the firearm and its ammunition are accessible to the passenger, a distinction that matters enormously if you're trying to travel with a firearm legally, rather than accidentally triggering the far more serious version of this rule. This directly sets up number 4, because bringing an undeclared firearm, receiver, or ammunition through a checkpoint isn't treated as a packing mistake at all. This is the item most likely to end your day in handcuffs rather than a delay. Number 4 is undeclared firearms and ammunition brought to a checkpoint or onto an aircraft. What most people don't realize is that TSA explicitly states travelers should check their baggage before leaving home to ensure they're not carrying any prohibited items, specifically to avoid a possible arrest and civil penalties. Language TSA doesn't attach to milder violations like an oversized liquid or a stray pair of scissors. Individuals who bring a firearm, explosive, or other seriously prohibited item to an airport or onto an aircraft face denial of expedited screening privileges going forward, with the duration of that disqualification depending on how serious the offense was and whether there's a repeated history of violations. This is genuinely the item on this entire list most likely to involve local police rather than just a TSA supervisor, since an undeclared firearm at a checkpoint typically triggers an immediate law enforcement response rather than a simple confiscation and move-on outcome. Travelers who legitimately forget a firearm is in a bag, which happens more often than you'd think with frequently used travel bags, still face this same serious consequence regardless of intent. But it doesn't end here, because number 3 involves behavior rather than an object entirely, and it's catching travelers who never packed anything illegal in the first place. This one isn't even about what's in your bag. Number 3 is interfering with security screening itself, a category that covers a surprisingly wide range of behavior at the checkpoint. What most people don't realize is that TSA's civil enforcement rules explicitly cover interference with security operations, assault, threat, intimidation, or interference with flight crew, along with filming in screening areas or obstructing passenger traffic through the checkpoint. According to recent enforcement updates, fines for these specific violations may reach roughly $12,900, separate entirely from any penalty tied to a physical prohibited item. This category genuinely surprises people because it has nothing to do with packing mistakes at all. Refusing a body inspection, arguing aggressively with an officer, or pulling out a phone to film a heated interaction at the checkpoint can all fall under this same enforcement umbrella, turning what started as a simple pat-down into a formal violation with real financial consequences attached. Staying calm and cooperative during screening isn't just good etiquette here, it's genuinely the difference between a 2-minute inconvenience and a fine that follows you home. And this is where it gets crazy, because number 2 involves an item category that sounds harmless enough to bring for personal safety, and instead lands travelers in exactly the same trouble. This personal safety item is treated as a genuine weapon. Number 2 is bear spray and other chemical repellents. What most people don't realize is that these items are restricted from checked baggage under current TSA and FAA regulations specifically because of their pressurized chemical nature, placing them in the same broader category as propane tanks, CO2 cartridges, and other compressed items considered potentially hazardous enough to cause serious harm within a fraction of a second if triggered accidentally in a cargo hold. Travelers heading to national parks or rural destinations sometimes assume a small canister of bear spray is no different from bug spray, and that assumption is exactly what gets bags flagged and travelers pulled aside for a longer conversation than they expected. Ceremonial daggers and certain ritual items fall into a similarly misunderstood category here too, since travelers carrying culturally or religiously significant blades sometimes assume sentimental or ceremonial purpose exempts the item from weapons rules. It doesn't. TSA evaluates these items based on their physical characteristics, not their intended use, which means a genuinely meaningful family heirloom can be confiscated with the exact same finality as a switchblade purchased at a novelty shop. Get ready, because number 1 ties directly back to where we started this entire list, and it's the single most common way ordinary travelers end up facing real financial penalties. This is the violation racking up the most fines of anything on this entire list. Number 1 is spare lithium batteries and power banks packed incorrectly, specifically inside checked luggage rather than the cabin. What most people don't realize is that portable chargers and power banks containing lithium-ion batteries must be packed inside carry-on bags, never checked luggage, because these batteries pose a genuine fire risk that needs to remain within reach and visible attention throughout the flight rather than sealed away in an unmonitored cargo hold. Spare lithium batteries specifically must be protected from short circuits, and damaged batteries are never allowed on board an aircraft in any form, checked or carried. This single rule accounts for an enormous share of confiscations and fines industry-wide, precisely because power banks are so common and so easy to forget about entirely once they're buried inside a suitcase pocket during a rushed packing session. TSA may confiscate the item, issue fines, or delay your entire screening process over a single misplaced power bank. And unlike some items on this list that simply get thrown away without further consequence, a lithium battery violation increasingly triggers the same civil penalty structure attached to more serious prohibited items, precisely because of the fire risk involved rather than any question of malicious intent. So here's where everything comes together. 10 items and behaviors, each carrying real financial or legal consequences that go well beyond the simple confiscation most travelers still expect walking into a checkpoint. Oversized hand tools exceeding the 7-inch limit, liquid-filled souvenirs like snow globes, cordless styling tools missing their required safety cover, brass knuckles and automatic knives crossing into genuine weapons law, high-proof alcohol exceeding the 70% threshold, firearm frames and receivers now formally classified under updated ATF definitions, undeclared firearms and ammunition risking outright arrest, interfering with screening procedures itself, bear spray and ceremonial blades treated as weapons regardless of intent, and finally, spare lithium batteries and power banks packed into the wrong bag entirely. The thread connecting every single one of these is the same lesson TSA itself keeps repeating in its own enforcement language. Carrying prohibited items may cause delays for you and other travelers, but they may also lead to fines and sometimes even arrest. That's not fear-mongering. That's TSA's own stated framing of the stakes in 2026. And civil penalties reaching up to $17,062 per violation make this a genuinely expensive category of mistake to make casually. The safest approach heading into your next trip isn't memorizing every rule perfectly. It's checking TSA's own "what can I bring" tool before you pack anything questionable, since the officer standing at the checkpoint makes the final call regardless of what you assumed walking in. If this saved you from a very expensive surprise, hit subscribe, because next week we're covering the international customs rules that catch even frequent travelers off guard. You won't want to miss that one.